Hello, and welcome to the Dissonance Podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. This is the third episode in our social work series and the second on social work education, inspired by our live stream panel discussion. Elizabeth is joined by Matt Watson from Pro Social Workers in a deep dive into recent research on ideological orthodoxy and student disaffection in social work education. We include a short Q&A with the author of the article that's our focus at the end. Check with the show notes for more information on pro-social workers and to learn how to access the full Q&A. Watch for more follow-up conversations in the third week of next month. Hi, welcome back. I'm here with Matt Watson again. We are doing a sort of a series here of on social work research. This article that we've chosen to talk about today, the in-class experience of social work students based on their political ideology, by Sorensen, Jones, and Casey. You emailed me and said, "Oh, this is great," and you actually know the author, so we hope to do a follow-up, right, with the author. So what, I guess I sent you several articles about this same topic. This particular article is, just bang on what you were interested in. What is the experience of students in the classroom who are not sort of what we expect of college students now, liberal and maybe woke, if you will. What's their experience in the classroom? And this is exactly what they did in this article, right? I did want to ask you. So we have it starts out with the one of the ethical standards, which we've talked about in a former panel discussion and a couple of other discussions. Social workers should obtain education about and demonstrate understanding of the nature of social diversity and oppression with respect to race, ethnicity, national origin, color, sex. Sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, marital status, political belief, religion, immigration status, and mental or physical ability. So that's one of the ethical standards. I was wondering, the very next thing that they talk about is competency in human diversity. I don't know what competencies in EPAS is.
Yes, so I forget what EPAS stands for, but it's the
Ethical practices of something, right?
No, it's kind of the minimum standard or the guidelines for I can't remember if it's social work education, but it has something to do with Council on Social Work Education. I should probably look it up here. We can describe that a little bit.
Well, he does also cite the Council of Social Work Education, but I just didn't know what these competencies were because I don't think we've ever discussed the competencies before.
So let's see here. The Council on Social Work Education, it's the Educational Policy and Accreditation Standards.
Oh, okay. So there's so this is, so it says social work educators are required to engage with political matters in their teaching and acknowledge political ideology as a factor in human diversity. So, this is basically the point is this is ethics and values that social workers are supposed to embrace, right? It's what I think most of us lay people think of as social workers too, sort of open and caring, broadly caring individuals. So the authors surveyed, let me find my methods section here, 507 people at 30 different social work undergraduate and so bachelor's and master's of social work students. So they say a convenience sample, and I presume that means that they emailed some heads of departments and asked them, would you send this out? I mean, it was IRB approved, but then I presume that's what that meant, was a convenience sample.
Yes.
So the sample was predominantly white, so 73% white, and they were somewhat small majority of master's work over bachelor's, and the average age of respondents was 30. Now, I thought that was kind of young. I'm sorry, I thought that was kind of old. I was thinking, it seems like so many students go almost directly to get a master's, because you do have to have a master's in social work to work in the field. Am I right?
Yeah. Clinical work, indeed. Yep, you can do some things with the bachelor's, casework kinds of things, but counseling and clinical work typically
Yeah.
require.
So anyway, I thought that was kind of older than I expected, but I looked it up, and the average student, the national average is like 33. So I guess
Mhm.
that's not that old. I guess people are returning a little bit later in life to get their master's degree after they've worked a little while and you don't have to have an undergraduate degree in social work, right, to get a master's.
That is correct.
So people are returning to go, because this field is attractive to them, I guess.
Hmm. Exactly. That was
So
consistent with my own cohort that I went to school with. We had many folks who were at different stages of their lives, so that, that's not too surprising.
Um, okay, so they had some questions about, um, you know, classroom experiences. They also had some qualitative prompts, and if we do get an opportunity to meet with the author, I would be interested in knowing what happened to that, because they don't do anything with the qualitative responses. So they apparently had 9 open-ended questions and don't know what, maybe they're planning to do something with that later. So I want to put a pin in that. I'd like to ask the authors what they did with that data. And then they ended up with 11 items that explored students' experience in the social work classroom based on their political beliefs. And these were things like, do you feel comfortable with political discussions in your social work classes? Um, have you ever felt judged or shamed by a classmate? And then a different one as an instructor in a social work class, after expressing your opinion related to your political or religious affiliation. Do you have a political, social, or religious opinion that you have chosen not to disclose in one of your social work classes? So you get the idea of the questions that they were asking. Um, and uh, they had to do a little um, messing around with the data. And I think this is important to say, because the data was overwhelmingly, it was skewed, they call it skewed negative. That means that there were fewer negative responses than there were positive responses. So most students reported having a positive experience in their classes. And I do think that's important to note, because we're about to talk about all the negative experiences. And so I do think it's important to say that, that the answers, skewed in the direction of more positive responses. So they had to make some adjustments to the data a little bit, do some statistical messing around to make the data uh, more analyzable. So students that affiliated with the Republican Party were more likely to report negative experiences in their social work courses, unfortunately, right? They said that they felt less comfortable, less safe, less willingness to um, share their opinions, and Christian students also. Um, I don't know if you're surprised by this.
No,
Sad, maybe
just
sad.
accept it. You know, it's just kind of an experience that I think most people who I've just heard it from many people who've been to different social work programs across the country have just shared that experience. And so it's just a reality. And I think religious or conservative uh, students just kind of accept it as it's just, you know, what price you pay for your beliefs and your values. And yeah, it is unfortunate. Um, I think what I've experienced is it's at a point where uh, it's approaching in some areas um, a just an orthodoxy where it's not it's like these students have reported it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel that they can talk about the things that they perceive, believe, think, and they just kind of keep their heads down, and it compromises the richness of social diversity that can happen, not just in their class but in their practice as well.
And one of the things that I worry about is not only those students who maybe, as you say, they've kind of become accustomed to it at this
Mm-hmm.
point. I also worry that the students who maybe have who do feel like who are not as conservative,
Mm-hmm.
not as religious, what are they learning in
Mm-hmm.
this class about people who are in these classes who are about and in entire programs about
Yeah.
people who might be different from them?
Yeah.
How are they? This is the safest place, right, in the classroom, or maybe in a mock counseling kind of situation or whatever. The safest place for people to be exploring their differences would be in the classroom, not out in the field where there might be other ramifications, but in the classroom. And they're not getting that because some portion of the students who could legitimately share that and offer new perspectives don't feel comfortable sharing it.
Yeah. Well, and if they're not exposed to differences, then how do you bridge with differences? You do miss out on opportunities to learn how to connect and bridge with people with different values, different perspectives, and so forth. The other thing that I've noticed is, and you know, you and I reviewed a separate article, is that when you have that orthodoxy in that classroom, it begins to feel and it's being perceived as though social work values are one political ideology, and that there is uh, that you can't have conservative beliefs or religious beliefs or values and be a real social worker. And that was the very genesis of the project that has brought you and I together and others is is this interest in viewpoint and political diversity in social work because of a thread that came up on the My NASW posting board where someone actually asked that, can you be a real social worker and have conservative values? And it was a very rich discussion, but it was interesting. And since then, I've just continued to follow many times on that board just how many times people reference that our values or social worker values are progressive values. So there's just kind of a missed opportunity
Mhm.
for that diversity in the classroom.
Yeah, because I would argue that the conservative and religious students are actually getting a better education just by the very nature of being exposed to
Yeah,
alternative viewpoints, where
yeah,
the others are not getting exposed because of self-censorship. They're not getting their they're not getting their money's worth.
yeah.
They're not practicing dealing with. I mean, which frankly, like the majority of the country is, sort of, middle in the middle, right? They're not
Mhm.
this progressive social, essentially what some of what social work presents itself as is the more progressive wing, and certainly we could argue at least half of the country is is not there. So
Yeah,
students who were not motivated into social work from their political beliefs were more likely to have negative classroom experiences. Students who had more negative experiences who believed no, students had more negative experiences when they believed their instructors and peers did not see their beliefs as being compatible with social work. So that's, basically what you just described. So the most significant predictor of negative classroom experiences was the person's political beliefs being, you know, believed to be incompatible with social work. So, I mean, I think, it's too bad because we've talked several times. I'm sort of like you. It's like, well, yeah, it's what I expected. Like, I think this is earth shattering on the one hand, and on the other hand, because we've talked several times
Mhm.
about this, on camera and off, I'm sort of like,
Yeah.
yeah, duh, right?
Yeah.
So, uh, before I could just keep on summarizing, but how do we get this kind of data in front of faculty members who will do something about it? Not faculty members who are going to say, oh, well, yeah, they're wrong, so this is a good thing. They should be booted out of programs or feel uncomfortable or reprogrammed
Mhm.
into the more, the social work way, whatever that is. How do we communicate this to social work educators in a way that that will facilitate better training
Yeah.
of social work students?
Well, that's the big question that I think we're trying to answer. But I think it is by clearly and reasonably articulating a case for political diversity, viewpoint diversity, religious diversity in social work education and social work practice. And just as you and I have done, uh, talk through some of these things, talk through um, to the degree that we can, the importance of the liberal values and being able to recognize diversity and pluralism in the world that we live in, and encouraging participation with different organizations and like-minded individuals. Because I believe that the majority of people, the majority of social workers, I believe, uh, would endorse and support political diversity. Um, it would be interesting to see to what degree um, there's confusion about political work and partisan work, because those things are not necessarily the same thing. But doing social work between political entities, political parties, people who are politicized, there are a lot of organizations right now that are interested in depolarization and viewpoint diversity. So, just to mention a few, Braver Angels is one that encourages people of different viewpoints to gather and to connect. So it's a little bit informal. It's not necessarily in the academy. But then you have organizations like Heterodox Academy, that do encourage it. Now, to my knowledge, there's not a social work. Um, uh,
There's not. We looked that up, right?
yeah.
That there are social workers
Mm-hmm.
within heterodox, but
Yeah.
there's not a social work group.
Yeah. And I'm
So
not sure what that's about, because I have actually reached out to Heterodox Academy. It's been a few years ago and asked about starting an organization. As you noticed, I'm not an academic, however. And so, I didn't know what ethos was. And so I just could recall it. But we have had a few colleagues that I'm associated with who have expressed some interest in involving themselves with Heterodox Academy. So that's just one. The other thing is just encouraging our colleagues who may not necessarily lean to the right, to stand with those who do, as in the interest of diversity, and recognizing that we're all enriched by viewpoint diversity. Uh, that my values may be different than your values, but you refine me as I learn a little bit more about your perspectives. Not necessarily, I'm speaking metaphorically, but I think just recognizing that dialogue and talking things out sometimes really helps us come up with better, more sustainable solutions to the things that we're trying to address in the world. And one political party doesn't always have, one the 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 right answers all the time. So I think that's just organizing, if you will, and being courageous and brave to stand up and share your thoughts and values, being confident in your willingness to be wrong, to stand corrected, to recognize when maybe we there may not be a right and a wrong. There may be a different paradigm to use. But if you are mistaken in an assertion or a data claim or anything like that, be willing to recognize that and to communicate that.
Yeah, these conversations that, like, we're having here, are the reasons why I thought I became an academic. And I'm realizing that, you know, that there are much fewer of these kinds of conversations over time. So, and I mean, we could blame the pandemic. There's all kinds of things that you just like, oh, people aren't in the office as much. They don't stand around and, talk as much. Okay, but it isn't just that. It really isn't. There is a definite, there seems to be more uh, certainty around a lot of academic conversations, and the sort of like I'm on the right side of history kind of thing. Less
Mhm.
sort of openness, less genuine curiosity, I think, right now. And I do, I don't want to suggest that I'm feel hopeless about it, because I do think that people who went to get an advanced degree in order to teach at the college level, whether it's in social work or something else, did that for reasons, that had to do with their genuine curiosity and wanting to learn about all different kinds of, ideas and theories and, statistics and all that kind of stuff. So, but right now I do think that there seems to be less of this kind of thing, and I really would like to see more of this. Just get back to those brown bag lunches that you
Sure,
used to
sure.
have. And
Well, I'll
you
just
know
offer one correction for you there, Elizabeth, and that is that I can't tell you how many social workers go into social work because they can't do math. They declare that when they introduce
yes,
it. So statistics is probably not a reason why they
yes,
went into social work, but the desire to help people.
yeah,
And you and I recognize that, hey, the more you can substantiate, the work that you're doing and develop an evidence base for it, that would work. But the reality is a lot of people want to just help. They just want to be helpful.
yeah,
But how do you know if you're really helping? How, have you measured? How do you systematically go about assessing and measuring your outcomes and so forth? And for many people, that's not why that social work hasn't drawn to some degree, folks into the field for those reasons. So.
well, and I think I've asked this question before, but I'll ask it again. um, I wonder, this is just, I'm pondering here, I wonder, I think that things like social work, things like counseling, um, you don't really know if you're helping, right? And frankly, I think there's plenty of evidence that you're not. Oftentimes, you're going back to the same house over and over again. You're checking in on people. With counseling, you're just over it. People are spinning, right, in their own, soup, right, over and over and over again. And I do wonder to some extent if this sort of progressiveness is almost it's a salve a little bit, for this sort of rawness of feeling like you're not making a difference. And so if you embrace this sort of progressiveness, then you get to
Mhm.
join sort of a bigger, a higher a higher cause somehow,
Mhm.
that's not religion, but it's I don't know how much of that goes on, but it has to be it's got to be a burnout field, right? And how else can you keep yourself going? I don't know.
Sure. Sure. Well, it's true. There are a lot of social workers who do burn out. You're right. There's some truth to that. I think also that some might suggest that what I just articulated earlier is we should check our privilege, that this is that measurements and outcomes and those kinds of things are reflective of patriarchal white supremacy, and that having measures, or suggesting that people should substantiate the benefits of their work, that is part of a of education, of the educational culture that you and I grew up in. But today, to suggest that somebody needs to substantiate their work with outcomes, I think that would get some pushback. I think there would be some people who would want to challenge that, who would suggest that that's evidence of white supremacy and so forth. That suggests whiteness, rather than just trusting that the lived experience that somebody's having, that they're feeling better, that they're feeling that like they're doing something. Well, how do you know if you're really doing something? And I think that is where you mentioned uh, you know the lack of empiricism, and the dogma that can be part of progressivism. That's when it does parallel or seem more closely tied to religion than it might to education or indoctrination, if you will. I know that's kind of a sensitive way of describing it, but if you're not looking at different sides of the coin, or different ways of viewing things, it can come across as that. And that's not a critique of of religion. That it's not a critique of progressivism per se, as long as it's acknowledged that many of these things are based on beliefs, based on lived experience, rather than uh, claims that are empirical, or that could be substantiated to others.
So I do want to mention to that point. Uh, I was shocked. I don't know, maybe you weren't. So, towards the end of the article, under limitations, which
Mhm.
I'm not really finished talking about the article, but I can't, but you opened a door here.
Okay.
They said, likewise, sexual orientation proved to be a significant independent variable on classroom experience. But, they say, the ratio of LGBTQ students in the study may not reflect social work students more broadly. The percentage of respondents reporting an LGBTQ identity in this sample was 37%.
Yeah.
25% identifying as bisexual or pansexual, and in the general population, that according to a Gallup poll that they cite in 2022, it was 7.1%.
Yeah.
So when we read these statistics and we see that identifying as straight and Christian was associated with higher reports of negative experiences, and we have a sample of where 37% of people are identifying as LGBTQ plus, I mean, I have to wonder, I mean, is this a trend that you're seeing in the field? Are we, is this, was this a, I mean, outliers happen, right? You get biased data, you get, unusual data sets, and I shouldn't say biased, but unusual data sets, right? You just happen to get a data set that has, more LGBT. That could happen, right? This could be an outlier. But I'm just asking you, what did you think when you read this? Did you think that it was an outlier, or were you thinking that that's a trend?
Yeah. Again, I'm not an academic, so I haven't been in the classroom for quite a while. But reading Jean Twenge's research on IGen and so forth, and different social trends, there is a bump and an increase. And social work does advocate for the disenfranchised, the marginalized, and so I think it is going to be of interest and attract people who are sexual minorities, if you will. And so while maybe I wasn't as shocked as you were, didn't surprise me significantly, because I think a lot of people who are in a minority group are going to have some interest in social work. And I also think that social work programs are likely to have interest in inviting and helping and welcoming uh, people who are of any minority status to be a social worker, just as as you know, reflecting the values of trying to be inclusive, to invite people who may be not in the majority into the program. So wasn't super surprised,
Yeah.
but I think it's just probably more reflective of a few things, cultural, but I think also social work education's interest in involving more minorities.
So, which is a wonderful thing, right?
Sure.
I mean, this is a positive. We would hope, though, that also they would be accepting of, you know, their own minority in their programs,
Hmm.
which appears to be straight and potentially Christian or more right leaning.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, sort of extending the olive branch,
Yeah. Right.
within their courses.
Yeah.
So this is I mean, we're I you know I think you're right, given that social work is probably not a research heavy field. This is like the second paper that we've looked at that had a big that had more of a research focus, and they did some maybe not super complicated statistics, but really reported their um, you know frequencies and and correlations, and they did an ANOVA, looked at group differences. They say that this is the largest sample of social work students surveyed to date, so never been a larger study, and that they included every region of the United States, three times as many institutions as any previous study, so they should be
Right.
applauded for this. And that they also they didn't find anything that they weren't surprised. They weren't that surprised to find these things, because previous research really had
Hmm.
pointed them in this direction, that that the classroom experience was not as welcoming for a diversity of perspectives as social work would like to present themselves
Yeah.
as. So one thing that I wanted to say is that they have, every article has like a bit of an apology section, and they say only 35% of the total variance is explained by the factors that they included. And yes, that's, what, 65% of the variance in discomfort or comfort in courses was not covered by the variables that they measured. At the same time, um, they're trying to be humble here, but you know what? I'm surprised that they are not celebrating that 35%. I mean, to explain 35% of the variance in something is not, it's not nothing. I mean, if I said I could explain 35% of the variance in your survival of cancer,
Hmm.
you would be totally on board, right? You would say, sign me up
Right.
to learn more about this.
You bet.
um, you know, so if you had an autistic child and I said I can explain 35% of the variance and whether your child, is successful in the long term or not, you would say, sign that child up right now. 35% of the variance in something like, I mean, in the field of education, for example, articles get published based on explaining 2% of the variance,
Mm.
in success in reading improvement or whatever. Now that's not true in
Sure.
every field,
Okay.
and it matters. It's like if we can explain 2% of the variance in like how long nail polish stays on,
You bet.
nobody cares, right? And
Hmm.
it's a trade-off.
Hmm.
If we can explain 35% of the variance, or 2%, however much, and it costs $1 billion, then we say, okay, well, we want to hold out for explaining 65% of the variance, right? Not 35. But in this case, I would argue that if you can explain 35% of the variance of something like something as important as a um, uh, as embracing the ethical code of the field, that we should be paying attention to this. I mean,
Mm.
this is big, because I would, I would sort of, I would run that parallel to the survival of someone who is ill, right?
Mm.
You know, this the social work field is, you know, I mean, we might argue is sort of an ill patient, not, it's not on its deathbed or anything, but it's not 100% where, and if we can explain 35% of the variance by, by knowing what someone's political, sexual orientation, their political orientation, and their religious um, affiliation is, then we should pay attention to that.
Sure.
And so I do wish that this kind of thing were more read
Yeah.
by the field.
So
um
you see that 35% is pretty significant
I do,
as
yes.
a
And
as somebody who's got that research background.
yeah, so yeah, I mean, this is something to celebrate. And I mean, of course you would still put it in your limitations. You would
Sure.
always write it in your limitations, because I
Yeah.
can't always can't explain all the variants. Of course you can't. But again, if it just sort of like your perspective,
Yeah.
a when you think that we could, uh 35% of the variance is enough so that this essentially free, right? This doesn't
Mm.
cost anything
Yeah.
to read more broadly, um, to instead of going to your, say, your university office of teaching and learning and asking how I can write a more, anti-racist syllabus, to say,
Hmm.
how can I write a syllabus that um, that embraces viewpoint diversity,
Yeah.
right? So that doesn't cost anything, right? It doesn't cost anything to do a different kind of course, activity, to include, something, a little bit something different in your lecture or whatever. So I would argue that this is a this that impact that it's a big impact for the investment. That's what
Yeah.
I would say.
So,
Um,
so it's worth exploring. It's worth looking into.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I think if you use the medical example, I think most people would be on board with it. If you asked a social work professor if I could explain 35% of the variance in, your client's success in terms of, staying off of drugs, let's
Hmm.
say, they would say, "Holy cow, I definitely want to do that."
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's no way they would say no. They said, "Oh, it's free. You just have to interact with this person a little bit differently." They
Hmm.
would be on board in a heartbeat. And so it's just a matter of sort of like, it's like, oh, wait a minute. If I take that model and I put it back onto, if I'm going to, have better classroom experiences, if I'm going to better prepare social workers for the actual people they're going to interact with. If I care about clients, then I care about my students interacting with clients, right?
Yeah.
So by that very nature, it makes sense to me that
Hmm.
this that they should be ready.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
Yeah.
if they believe in the ethics of
Yeah.
their field and
Yep.
they believe that in doing best for their clients, then they should,
Yeah.
so
Absolutely. Well, I think that's important to recognize, and that there are likely some things that could be done to see if we could move the needle even a little bit more. Because there were other things in there, and I don't know if you read this and you understand this better than I, but um, one of the key findings for me was not just the um, the factors about who they voted for in 2020 and how they identify politically in terms of their party and what they believe ideologically, their leanings, liberal, conservative, those kinds of things. uh, the key finding to me was that the most significant predictor of negative classroom experiences is the perception of one's political beliefs being incompatible with social. So if you're going and you're being pushed and you're being, you know, refined, but you ultimately end up leaving or concluding that your beliefs are inconsistent with your uh, with your discipline or with your major, that is a problem. And I just think of my own experience in my own social work education, my bachelor's program. The last class, I did a paper that was on secularization of in the United States, and how there are the historical, the kind of increased secularization, but how there were behavioral trends that were kind of mirroring secularization. So I did this presentation, and I was challenged on it by my colleagues, by my students, and they were asking me, where did you get your statistics, or where did you come up with this? Well, I just went through Supreme Court rulings and those kinds of things, and showed that was the basis for secularization. But my statistics just came from the library. I had to go to get books back then in the U.S. statistical abstracts, and I just went and kind of took a look at some of these things. But the beauty of that was that I left feeling like, okay, what I'm talking about, what I'm believing, I haven't just got a free pass. I was challenged. I was, and those challenges refined me. They made, I think they helped make me a better social worker. They helped me recognize my blind spots, ways to strengthen my position, and so forth. Whereas if you just get stuck in a class, and you just feel like, this, I'm not a good fit, or this doesn't work, should social work education help help students recognize their values and what they believe, and how that is compatible or not compatible with social work education. And in that thread that I was telling you about earlier, where it brought me and our other contributors and myself together, that thread, that posting board, there was a lot of refinement that happened on there, where a lot of us were challenged, that we had to demonstrate how conservative values align with the code of ethics. And it was in doing that helped draw some attention to those of us who took up the challenge to do that. Helped us identify and articulate how these conservative values did match the code of ethics. And I think more importantly, wasn't to say that, hey, look at these conservative people, they're right. It was to say, hey, there's room in social work for both religious people, politically conservative people, people of different political parties, that we need to be able to bridge across differences. And I hope that social work education would involve and increase the degree to which they're inviting viewpoint diversity as part of their curriculum, and that the educational standards that are put forward. Is there a way? How can we help more students, more future social workers, recognize that there's room for you and just because of your race, your religion, those kinds of things, doesn't make you a racist. It doesn't define you. There's needs for us to recognize room in the tent for different viewpoints.
Yeah, and So I'm assuming that there aren't so many social workers that we can afford for some of them to feel to just drop out of their programs. I'm assuming that social workers are there's a need for them, right?
Hugely. We have
So
huge demand.
so and I don't see
And
that the, what
if social workers appealed to their non-progressive, non-liberal citizens, if social workers were not seen as exclusively progressive, as exclusively left-leaning, the demand for social workers, I think, would increase even more.
yeah, it seems like, I mean, religion is an area that seems to, I mean, there's a service aspect to religion that it seems would then people would say, oh well, I would actually want to make that my profession. I don't want to become a nun. I will
Mhm.
become a social worker. Right? I mean, these do seem to, it does seem that it would be compatible, that religion in theory, sort of,
Yeah,
if you take from the thousand miles up, it would seem completely compatible.
yeah.
And I don't think that any of these things that you're suggesting, that you know that your group is suggesting, the method, the process that you're asking, or that you're saying is compatible with social work ethics, is exactly what has been happening, uh, for good reason, to be more progressive and inclusive of minorities, right? These are the same practices, procedures,
Right.
and everything. Just apply them broadly,
Exactly.
not so narrowly that we don't, again, we don't just do anti-racist work. We do some of we apply those principles, which people have now learned, we sort of ingrained in us, right?
Mhm.
We are so much more aware now,
Mhm.
of inclusivity. It seems as though, at least in I mean, I am an academic. It does seem, though, that has been very narrowly defined. So what it means to be inclusive has been very narrowly defined, and if you're not doing that kind of inclusivity, then you are not engaging in inclusive practice. And I mean, I hear you saying nothing that we aren't already hearing in academia that we should be doing,
Yeah,
just doing it more broadly.
that's it.
And so as not to, again, in a field that needs good people, needs needs good educational experiences to build people that can go out into a world that is way more diverse
Mhm.
than and we are, again, so much more aware of that. This is, apply those practices more broadly and make sure that people can get a good education and believe that their values are, I mean, I would not want someone to set aside their values, whatever those are, because they said, oh well, I've spent this much money and now I have to pretend to be something else. I mean, again, this is what it means, what sort of the progressive movement has been, hammering away at. Like, we need people to not have to pretend to be something that they're not.
Right.
So let's just
Right.
apply those principles more broadly.
Yeah. Well, as I've done presentations, through pro social workers and the other things that we're involved in, um, when we survey people, it it is almost it's consistently people who identify as liberal or very liberal. The majority, in fact. Um, Yet, in every single one of those presentations that we've done, we've always facilitated helpful conversations. Uh, Not one time have I had somebody shout me down or deplatform me. I know my colleague Xander has been ironically, marginalized and uninvited for a presentation. But once we start the conversation, once we're there, it's consistently among social workers a better experience than I think one might anticipate, because it is humanizing. It's being able to again articulate what it is that is believed, or what might be the basis for the moral foundations, if you will, for more liberal political beliefs, and what are the moral foundations for conservative political beliefs. All of these things can work well in social work education, and I think there's many opportunities to address the concerns that are identified in this article, this paper, that if we could really move the needle on the perception of political beliefs being compatible with social work, I think it would really do a service to the profession, and it would do a broad service to the world in which we live. I do as well tell you that, to your point, there are a number of people who said, I just kept my head down and my mouth shut to get through my education. And that is, I think, a compromised educational experience when students don't feel like they can speak up, be transparent, and that their beliefs and values will be challenged in a respectful way. That was the interesting thing. Another interesting thing from the article is that the vast majority of students expected that they would be challenged, but they didn't expect or appreciate that their beliefs would simply be marginalized, silenced, or canceled.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if I know that I know that I marked that part where, that students actually did expect and want. Students, let's see, oh, I don't know. I know that that you're right. They actually said that they expected, students overall in the study
Yeah.
expected that they would be having these kinds of conversations.
Hmm.
And uh, you know, I think that it is more on the faculty than on the students. I do think students expect when they go to college that they will be, um, you know, they will be engaging in these kinds of difficult conversations, and I think that maybe even they crave them a little bit,
Yeah.
um, and yet when they get there, the faculty shy away, and I think that's I mean, you don't have to hear too many stories, right? It's
Hmm.
too many stories like mine,
Exactly.
a few other people that we know, where you start to realize, oh, I should just keep my mouth shut and go with the flow for now.
Hmm.
I think though, it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, do you think that people who are, uh, you know, I guess maybe people who are more religious maybe feel uncomfortable in a medical school classroom? I don't know. Maybe they do. People who are, who are more right leaning feel more uncomfortable in or, I don't know, in a law school classroom. I don't know.
Right.
But this seems extreme to me, and in just in such a disconnect with
Yeah.
the ethics.
Well,
So
he did. They did acknowledge that higher education overall skews to the left, and and I think what's happening in whether it's in law school or in medical school or other things, I think there is a movement to the progressive where critical theory is indeed becoming part of education in medical practice, in legal practice, and those kinds of things. So I think it's a great question. Are there similar thoughts, fears attitudes or beliefs in other professions. That would be interesting to do a little lit review on that.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate. I'm glad that we found this article, and I hope that we can have a second conversation with the authors. Again, I really want to know what they have done or what they plan to do with their open-ended questions, and I'd be really interested. They don't offer suggestions here for a remedy. They don't really have and so I'd like to know what they've been thinking about since then.
Mm-hmm.
What what they've been thinking about in terms of what to do next, whether it's research wise or suggestions. So
Mm-hmm. You bet. I think the thing that I just appreciated about the article that resonated with the project that I'm involved in with others is just the interest in expanding the tent rather than shrinking the tent. The bringing in more viewpoints and more perspective is I think going to benefit many people, including the profession itself. Um, and I think that's what really spoke to me from this article is just helping. And again, I just to reiterate what I said earlier, if viewpoint diversity were part of the educational standards of the CSWE, and if it would be interesting to see if what impact it would have to help students identify their values, social work values, and how they mesh. Because the social work values of service, social justice, the dignity and worth of the person, the importance of human relationships, competence and integrity, those are things that can speak to conservative as well as progressive and liberal and moderate, centrists. And I think that is that there's definitely room in the tent. And this article, I think, has significant value, significant importance in highlighting that and making that recommendation.
and I just keep going back to the client. If we were preparing if we were preparing surgeons to only operate on progressives. It's like, sorry, I only operate on people who voted for Obama.
Mm-hmm.
I only operate on people who are non-denominational. I mean, come on, right?
Right.
I mean, that's about as silly as I work, I'm prepared to offer social work services to people of certain,
Mm-hmm.
political ideologies or
Yeah. Well, if
religions.
somebody comes into the therapy office with a MAGA hat, that
Right.
was that was actually discussed on this board. There were few. There weren't a lot who said I just couldn't work with them. The vast majority said, you know what, I would find a way to work with them. The question is, how do you know that your work with them is helpful to them? How do you know that it reflects competence and integrity? And how do you know that? How do you help them with their self-determined goals, their self-determined beliefs, and so forth? That's an important part of social work
Right.
is self-determination.
Yeah, would you only be considering yourself successful if the person, doesn't wear the MAGA hat anymore, right? It's like, oh, that's my measure of success, that they've changed their voting behavior, or, they've changed their, expression, their willingness to express their, political opinion in public or in a doctor's office or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do worry about that, because I think that's what you've heard from some social work students. I've certainly heard from some of my former students who went into social work, where they contacted me and said, first of all, I want more research. That's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that they've said. I want more research, but also that they felt that they needed to self-censor, regardless of, you know, what side of the political spectrum they are on. I mean, that's one thing that I don't think is this article does not address, which is the extent to which we see in other surveys, not this one, but in other
Mhm.
research, that overwhelmingly students are self-censoring across the board
You
in
bet.
all of their courses. And it
Mhm.
doesn't, even if they're on, even if they're the more sort of like, if we say like the accepted current, group, they're still self-censoring because they are so worried about somebody, repeating some, like essentially just thinking ill of them because they expressed an opinion or asked a question, which, I mean, that's what you're supposed to do in classes, right? Ask a question.
Exactly.
It's not just about expressing your opinion, because there's one thing, one thing I don't do anymore. As a matter of fact, I used to do a lot of small group discussions in my classes. So, like a reading, and then pass out questions, and they would, answer the questions in a group and hand. I almost never do that anymore for a couple of
Mhm.
reasons. One is that they sit and look at their phones. They don't actually interact with each other. They just sit
Mhm.
and play with their phones. Um, but another is that they don't interact with the material. Now we have standpoint epistemology even in small groups, where it's like
Mhm.
that, so you're not it's like, well, this is my opinion about the material, so they're not really engaging with the material. I say, can you suspend reality? What if this were true?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you don't agree with it, but
Right.
what if it were true? And
Yeah.
people seem unable or unwilling to
Uh-huh.
do that now. And I do think that's partly because we haven't learned to have these discussions. And so it's a way of shutting things down. Well,
Right.
I just don't like this, or I don't, it was, you used to hear, oh, this article was too hard. But
Mhm.
now it's just like I reject it, or it's inappropriate to talk about, or whatever. And so we're not having, I mean, so I'm guilty, of,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, this isn't going well. People aren't really engaging with the material. One person states an opinion, and then
Mhm.
it's done. Nobody
Really?
talks anymore.
So that's
It's
why
just,
you don't do groups anymore, is that as
mhm,
soon as somebody states an opinion, it's over with.
it's over with.
Everything just needs to be nice, affirm, and
Yes.
endorse.
Yep.
Interest.
And they can't seem to not express an opinion. That seems to be it's like that's
Yeah.
what they think they're doing.
Yeah.
Instead of answering the question, engaging with the material in this sort of scientific mindset or
Right.
whatever, it's just like, well, here's my opinion on it. Everything's done. The
Right.
people won't challenge the others on stuff. And so it's just, then they just sit and look at their phones,
See,
so
Elizabeth, that, to me, that is tragic
it is.
because I saw in my own social work education experiences where somebody would say something and hearing themselves say that, some people are external processors. And once you say it out loud, you're almost like, well, wait. Let me see if I can't reel that back in. And I saw this actually in a small group. And it's interesting you're bringing this up. We obviously didn't script this, but um, in a small group where I was a part of it, I saw uh, a gay person silence her, a lesbian silence herself when the question came up. Should this was in the 90s, so it was, should gay and lesbian people be able to adopt or foster children? I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of the two. And I saw in this small group somebody who leaned right uh, make a claim that no, I don't think so. They made the case that uh, you know, two parent families, all that kind of traditional talking points, if you will. That that there's some basis to it, some backing to it. But this person was just silent. Well, interestingly, her silence did speak, and I saw the person who said that, watch her response and hear her say, "Well, I'm not going to say anything." Just like you said, she didn't say anything. But then I saw this person who leans, who at that point in time leaned pretty conservative, by that experience, just recognize, oh wait, then they started talking about, well, then should single people not be able to adopt? How's this going to work? Is this really in the best interest of children in the system? I mean, they started to talk those kinds of things out loud in a small group interaction. And, optimally, the lesbian woman would have been, it would have been, I think, helpful if she would have actually said something or articulated
Said
different
some
points.
of those very things, like, well, wait a
Wasn't
minute, there's a lot of kids in the system, yeah, that
or it
need
wasn't safe.
parents.
Yeah, it wasn't safe for her to speak up. Um, I could see, especially when the first voice was kind of delivering these other assertions. But interestingly, small group interaction is sometimes the most effective. And if we just get silence and go to the phone, that really is tragic.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, Fire, Heterodox, Pew, I mean, multiple surveys just keep showing that self-censorship in the classroom has never been higher. And we've done a few things on, the dissidents about the McCarthy era and stuff. And when you compare the McCarthy era to now, it's
Mm-hmm.
nothing. There essentially is no comparison. McCarthy era self-censorship was around 13%.
Mm.
It's like, I mean, it's like,
Yeah,
over 50% now.
yeah,
People feel that they can't, they shouldn't,
really,
oh
really,
yeah. I mean, it's, and they feel I mean, some of these, like some of these questions here,
yeah,
in this particular study, about feeling shamed, or, that like openly, um, you know, uh, you know, intellectually, um, shamed, about things, you know, feeling judged, that kind of stuff. People are so worried about it, and I do think it's a social, it's a sort of a side effect of social media and stuff,
you
because
bet.
people get outed in such, in such public ways. But yeah, it is sad, and I think that there's no better place than research
Mm-hmm.
to study people, sort of the ugly side of human behavior,
You
and
bet.
there's no better place than in a classroom to try out, as you say, try out these ideas. What
Right.
if I say this? How does that sound when I
Yeah.
say that,
Yeah.
right? And
Exactly.
that's part of the process.
Yeah.
And I do think that is sorely missing now in the classroom. So
Exactly. Well, and from the conservative voice in that example I gave, are they not redeemable? Can they not change? Can
right.
can can they not be influenced through their educational experience? Uh, you know, from those who lean progressive, could a conservative people see them as redeemable, or somebody who can they're worth building a bridge with, and at least understanding their perspective. And this is where those other entities, whether it's heterodox or braver angels or fire, these they're different groups out there, different organizations out there that really do defend free speech, uh, freedom of the press, different things to really make a difference. So,
Well, I think we'll stop there. Thank you
all
for
right.
having this discussion with me.
Well, thank you. Thanks for bringing the article to my attention. I was surprised. I didn't know that my recently made colleague was involved in this kind of research. So it was.
Yeah, you said, wait a minute. I think I
I just met
you
him the day before. It was amazing.
well, hopefully we'll get to talk to him soon.
Yep, yep. We'll be in touch.
Thanks.
All right.
Matt and I reached out to the author of the article we just discussed. Dr. Sorensen graciously agreed to meet with us to answer some questions. What follows is an excerpt of that conversation. Check out the podcast notes for the link to the full interview. Thank you for listening, and thanks to CJ Sorensen for taking his time to talk with us.
So you asked about how this paper came to be. So as part of my doctoral work, um, I was contemplating what to do for a project. And as a clinical professor in social work, it was fairly common that students would approach me, often privately and quietly, and say, "Hey, Professor Sorensen, I'm feeling some angst about my social work education experience. Here's what I'm hearing in the classroom, and here's where I stand politically. And how do I make sense of that and reconcile it?" And so, as I was thinking about topics that interest me and that I wanted to learn more about, this topic was at the forefront of my mind. What is the experience of students who are more politically conservative in the context of social work education? That's how the study came to be.
So we again we read it with I guess as even Matt, even though Matt's not in the classroom much, he was like, "This does not surprise me." Did it surprise you at all um, that so many students were, um, I guess, left leaning? Number one, that a preponderance,
Mhm.
and that many seem to have reported that they came to social work almost because of that ideology. Did that surprise you at all?
Not really. From my own experience in social work education, and then in my experience as a social work educator, anecdotally, I sort of knew that that was the case, even though I didn't have all of the data that this study helps us to have more clarity around.
Uh,
As the two of you have already mentioned, there's been kind of a dearth of research around this, but I think more important than just the numbers is the experience of those small numbers of students, right? Like, what are they experiencing in the social work classroom? Because we all know they're a minority of students, but what's it really like for them? And the few studies that have been done over the past 15, 20 years really bore out that it's a difficult experience for them, that they're dismissed and marginalized and sometimes shamed and judged, oftentimes take on inauthentic views to sort of get through. But those were largely smaller scale qualitative studies, sort of targeted in one institution or a few institutions.
but as you point
So
out, it's difficult from the professorial side also because we don't you don't want to. I mean, we'll just take something, kind of, like, flat earthers. Okay, so we have a flat earther
right.
in the classroom, and we don't want to give too much airtime, right, to the flat
Mhm.
earther. And there's this balance, right? And I think sometimes, and professors also, I mean, maybe I'm in the minority, but I think historically we have wanted to appear neutral. We don't want to reveal our, political ideology or whatever. We want students to feel comfortable. Again, at the same time, it's a difficult balance because we don't want to entertain, they're in the marketplace of, we should let the marketplace of ideas sort of decide what's more true. At the same time, in the marketplace of ideas, there are some bad ideas, so
Yeah,
it is
right.
difficult. And I do think that, I mean, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I think in my time as a professor, I have seen this change from val the the goal to appear neutral to the goal to appear progressive,
Mhm.
and I do see that as a change in the in just sort of in the air. It's like in the air that we're breathing now, that we're supposed to appear, more progressive.
Right.
So I
Yeah,
think
and
that studies like yours give us more motivation to uh, go back to move to move forward towards a more neutral stance. But that's my perspective.
yeah, and I think that in the literature review, it was interesting to find a handful of kind of more editorial articles that addressed this tension that exists and where we should go as educators to address these very kinds of things that you're talking about. Yeah, so maybe for the audience, we'll clarify here that the composite score ends up being the dependent variable. And then the independent variables we looked at primarily were political philosophy, so conservative, liberal, progressive, moderate, or other, and then political party, Democrat, Republican, independent, or other, and then 2020 presidential vote. And to give just a quick idea about what some of those 11 items were on the composite score of classroom experience, it's things like, it's a Likert scale, five point Likert scale. Do you feel comfortable in the social work classroom when discussing things that intersect with politics? Do you feel emotionally safe, physically safe? Do you ever feel judged or shamed by classmates? Do you ever feel judged or shamed by the instructor? Do you feel like the atmosphere is conducive to expressing alternative viewpoints? Do you feel like your instructor is open to opinions other than their own? Those are the kinds of things we were asking on that 11-item scale.
And can you tell us what you found?
Yes. So with respect to political ideology, we found that conservative leaning students were much more likely to have negative experiences in the classroom, whereas liberal progressive students were much more likely to have positive experiences in the classroom. We found that Republican students were more likely to have negative experiences in the classroom. And we found that Trump voters in 2020 were much more likely to have negative experiences in the classroom.
So now you do say that, I think you sort of summarized, the most significant predictor of negative classroom experience is the perception that one's own political beliefs were incompatible with social work. And so I kind of want to, we talked about another article, Matt and I talked about another article, where basically the authors were arguing that that's okay. They don't say it. I'm definitely paraphrasing here, okay? But basically that would be okay because social work is a progressive, social justice oriented career, profession, avocation, and that people should sort of come around to that in order to be really good social workers. That maybe even it's in that article that social work programs should be gatekeepers for people who don't fit. So your argument is that maybe we should do some things to make the environment more comfortable for people with diverse viewpoints. The other paper, the authors were arguing that we need to ensure that people do embrace the progressive nature of social work, because that's basically what makes social work, social. That's what that the social justice aspect needs to be reinforced and that people need to embrace that.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of thoughts that I have about that, and I'll first go back to these students who would come to me, who I knew on a personal level. And these were well-meaning, intelligent, compassionate, capable, skilled students who were equipped in every way to be effective social workers. And so that seems a little bit problematic to me to insist that someone must be liberal, progressive politically to be an effective social worker. And so I argue that perhaps we should enlarge the tent, and that there could be some real benefits in having ideological diversity for our profession. The second point I would make is that even if the goal is to get all of the students to come around to a liberal progressive ideology, is the method through judgment and shame and marginalization, or is it through logical and compassionate persuasion? And I think that the latter would probably be more effective than what some of these students are reporting they're experiencing.
So, CJ, tell us a little bit about, you emphasize the importance of critical pedagogy. And so we'll be a little critical here and invite you to kind of have a dialogue and do our best to challenge and invite different viewpoints in here. What would you say to someone that might suggest that these students of yours, maybe your study finds that they're uncomfortable? Is that evidence of their own fragility? Maybe they haven't been exposed to alternative viewpoints before. Maybe their introduction to differences is creating some challenges for them.
Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, and maybe an important point. Like, discomfort in and of itself may not be problematic. In fact, it may be a really good thing to push us, out of our comfort zones and to learn and grow. I certainly have experienced that in my own educational process, and it's been a very positive thing, even if at times it's produced some angst. So discomfort by itself is not necessarily a problem. Maybe that does reflect on some fragility of a student, or maybe it just reflects that they're kind of pushing the boundaries of what they know and understand and have experienced. But when we take all of the data together, that these students are also reporting that they feel judged and shamed, now we're in a different kind of territory, right? And when they talk about not feeling physically safe, that was another kind of surprising thing to me, that students are reporting not feeling physically safe. That's another indicator that this isn't just about fragility. There's an atmosphere being created in the classroom that shuts people down, and they end up, by their report in this study, hiding what they think and feel, and just taking on whatever they think is expected so that they can get through. And that doesn't serve anyone, in my view. That's not good for the student. It's not good for the profession. And so I would push back on that idea that this is just about fragility.
Was it only conservative students who identified a lack of intellectual or ideological or political or physical safety in the study?
Not necessarily. Now, of course, we took all of those items and we averaged them together and then ran the analysis. So it's hard to parse out exactly. Mm-hmm. But let me just give you one example. So on the item, do you feel like the atmosphere is conducive to expressing alternative points of view? Mm-hmm. About 60% of the sample identifies as liberal, progressive, and or a Democrat. But on that particular item, when we asked that question, 50% of the respondents said sometimes or less. Sometimes, rarely, or never. So that's a pretty significant chunk of the students, close to or just above a majority of students, who at least sometimes don't feel like the environment is conducive to expressing alternative views, which by the numbers would have to include some of those liberal progressive students or Democrat students who, by assumption, would always feel comfortable when it comes to political.
And to be fair, this is what most surveys of students have been finding. More and more students feel that they are self-censoring in the classroom, regardless of their political orientation. Students are just feeling vulnerable and uncertain about, and it's not just about their professors, it's about other students feeling like maybe someone would post something about them or, say something rude after they left or who knows what. So this is, again, to be fair, this is pretty universal across undergrad, graduate students, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Pew survey, the heterodox survey, the FIRE survey, we could go on. They're finding more and more that students are self-censoring.
Yeah, and that's a really important point to highlight. I think it would be really interesting to learn more about which factors are at play here that most influence this kind of experience for students. Because when we asked about do you ever feel judged or shamed by your instructor, it was actually lower than the response by other students. So that's pretty interesting. And what factors exactly are creating this feeling for students, or what combination of factors exactly are contributing to this? Because of course my study is all just correlation, right? We're not looking at causation at all.
Right.
To be focused on more of a bottom-up approach, a dialogic approach, one that focuses on collaboration instead of indoctrination, instead of authoritarian depositing of certain dogmas that a student needs to accept in order to be a good whatever, in this case, social worker. I think social work has a set of core values, and 95% of the respondents in this survey said that social justice, as an example, was a value that resonated with them. But there's clearly different definitions of what that means and different methods about how it can be achieved. And I think there's value in having dialogue about that. Like, that makes all of us better. That refines our perspective when we can have some really engaging conversation about what this looks like and how we bring it about. There needs to be some push-pull. And so I see, as educators, one of our roles is to help facilitate that kind of intellectual engagement and conversation in respectful and collaborative and cooperative and compassionate ways.
So why not pursue things through a progressive lens, where progressivism tends to dominate, as Elizabeth mentioned, and to the degree that many are self-censoring? Why not encourage that self-censoring? Why not why would you want to spend all this time talking, back and forth about different ways to pursue social justice? Why not just embrace progressivism?
Yeah. Well, let me be clear that I don't have a problem with anyone, individually embracing progressivism. But I think we run into problems when we create echo chambers. And echo chambers inevitably are going to lead to deafness around certain kinds of tones and experiences. And I come from a state with lots of rural communities with conservative religious people, and they need social work too. And they might be best served by social workers who know and understand their culture and their way of life and can relate to them. And so I think that if we just say social work must be this, we run the risk of actually doing harm in the long run, because there's nothing challenging that perspective. There's no one saying, whoa, let's pull on the reins here. Heaven knows that the helping professions have done a fair amount of damage over the years by quickly embracing some or other idea. And I think we increase the likelihood of doing something like that when there's not ideological diversity. And then the second point, just to highlight it, is what about all of these communities and peoples and places who are in desperate need of social workers who can do an extraordinary job and may not hold politically progressive or liberal ideas? And so where a liberal progressive might have a real fire in their belly to push something forward and change something, and a conservative might say, ooh, I don't know about that. Maybe we should keep doing what's been done, or maybe there's some value in what's been done. That kind of tension and push-pull is healthy for our profession, and it's healthy for our democracy, in my opinion.
So dialoguing across differences, being able to articulate fairly and accurately the potential unintended consequences of your conservative beliefs is critical for a social worker to do. Or being able to articulate the unintended consequences of your progressivism is an important thing to do. But really being able to say, this is what I believe would be best, but having some awareness of those unintended consequences.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, shouldn't we challenge all of our own ideas and other people's ideas? And I mean challenge in a thoughtful way, not in an angry, violent way. But I think it's good for ideas to be challenged and to be thought through. That's good for policy making. It's good even clinically. We jump on bandwagons and
Sure.
and then we find out a few years later that it wasn't so good after all.
So is there a way that say we could create a world where everyone is equal, everyone has equal access to resources, that that we have equality of outcomes, where we just don't have people on the margins?
That's a big question, and I can't predict the future, but I think that would probably be unlikely. I do think that I sort of have this idealistic hope and vision that social workers, who are oftentimes called healers, could play more of a role in helping communities and society to become integrated instead of fragmented. Because in my view, just like clinically, if there's fragmentation inside an individual, it's a sign of trauma, right? It's a symptom of wounding. And that's what our communities and society look like right now. And I would love for social workers to lead the way instead of promoting fragmentation by focusing on some of the things that we're presently focused on, to lead the way in helping communities heal and integrate. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be people who continue to struggle and suffer and who are marginalized, but it's a constant call for us as social workers to be involved in the work of healing and pursuing peace.
So if that is the case, one of the things in our conversation with the other author, who was encouraging embracing progressivism and more that social work education should embrace a certain ideology of progressivism. We asked specifically, why not encourage dialoguing across differences? Why not encourage, or respect different moral foundations, that there, people come to the table with different moral foundations. If you apply moral foundations theory, for example, where there's care, there's fairness, there's liberty, loyalty, authority, sanctity. People, come to the world with, or they experience their world through different moral foundations. We asked, why not just respect some of those differences and allow for differences among social workers? And my recollection, Elizabeth, you can help me with this, but my recollection was his response was, well, that's a nice ideal, but in reality,
we should do it.
Yeah.
But we should do it, or we should do it right? That yes, there should be dialogue, and people should be encouraged to move towards, a progressive, beliefs or endorse progressive programs, because that's the dominant, in social work, that's the dominant, I don't want to say it's the dominant ideology, because it isn't just that, right? The way that it's described is that it's part of what social workers do. It's part of what social work policies are. It's social work ethics, all of that. So it's not ideology necessarily. It's that progressivism is at the core of what social work is, and that must be embraced in order to be a good social worker. And in fact, Matt, you also even went one step further, and you asked about a few places where someone might be placed. And I guess I would even flip that around and say, is someone who is, say, Christian, maybe doesn't believe in, certain, that there's more than two genders, and those, gets placed somewhere, I mean, let's flip it, gets placed, say, in in a large city where there's a lot of young people, and like, can someone who is, identifies as Christian and maybe more right-leaning, can someone be an effective social worker? Would that be, in an area like that? Or, yeah, so could they do the social justice work, the social work that's required of them in that particular area?
Yeah, I think that the social work values and code are sort of the guide, and one of those is that we would not impose our values on to a client. So if they can honor any client and every client as a person with dignity and worth, and engage in a relationship of positive regard and trust with that person, and assist them with their needs without imposing their personal values onto that client or client system, then I think that they can be an effective social worker. And I think social workers are doing that all the time. You know, we pull out some of these hot button issues, but there's always conflicts of values between a social worker and a client in some way, shape, or form. And we have to just be aware of those and decide how we're going to engage the client based on those differences. But I don't think it should be then prohibitive of someone being called a social worker.
So
We've talked a lot about this dialogue. What does facilitating dialogue look like in a social work classroom, for example? So how can you actually make that happen? And can we sort of narrow it down a little bit? What might that look like in sort of the context of your normal job that you're already doing? We're not reinventing all of the curriculum, throwing out our entire syllabus. We're trying to broaden the tent in the course of our regular job.
Yeah. I think maybe modeling, as social work educators and or supervisors, we end up doing quite a bit of modeling for our students. And I just think, what are we modeling for students if in the context of a classroom, we say, are there any other views about this? And when someone expresses it, to receive it with thoughtfulness and with compassion, and to engage in a conversation about it. And there can be modeling of intellectual curiosity and cultural humility and democracy, right there in that little micro interaction between a professor and a student, that the other students observe and see that, oh, this is how this can play out in the real world, and we can make some movement towards more collaboration and cooperation and community.
that's great, CJ. I would agree with that. The social work is oftentimes a process, not necessarily a destination. It's more of an orientation that we take of dialoguing and modeling that, and certainly appreciated how you've modeled that, and accepted some questioning and some ways where you could reflect how social workers can adopt different viewpoints and or come from different perspectives and be quite effective. And I would agree that modeling is critical. So thank you for doing that today.
You bet. Thank you.
And we're very appreciative of your article, and we're happy that it got published.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
I was very pleased.
Yes.
CJ, can you tell us a little bit, just from your perspective, for people trying to be pro-social, to dialogue across differences, to seek to humanize others regardless of their political beliefs or ideology, that are willing to stand on ethical principles, the ethical principles that we just discussed. That's what we would say is pro-social, but I'd be interested in your own definition. What does it mean to you to be pro-social?
I think it means to me pursuing connection and community with all its variations and complexities, you know? And in our quest for justice, I think we should be really careful not to be unjust. And in our pursuit of peace, I think we should be really careful not to destroy. And in our quest for love, I think we ought to be really careful about not hating. And so pro-social to me is being an active participant in relationship with other people to solve the world's problems and our families and communities' problems and move towards healing and integration and peace.
That's great. Thank you very much. It's wonderful.
A beautiful place to end.
Thank you both very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you.